And welcome back to another edition of World History Coronapocalypse. This week is week 31, the Holocaust, meaning our sponsor today is Human History. Human History, no matter how bad things are today, don't worry, they were always worse once before. Human History. Alright guys, so this is the last thing I'm going to post to you for the next 2 weeks. Please follow the mouse. Note, next week is technically spring break on the calendar, so I will be going dark for those of you who are regularly checking in. On April 6th, I will come back with additional postings and we will begin our wrap-up phase of World War II. But before we can wrap up, we have to do the lesson that I like to traditionally cover right before spring break because I'm a monster and I like bumming you out. So, the Holocaust. I have 5 activities for you as well as a recommended film list. We'll get to that in a moment. Please keep in mind, guys, because this has been a question. Remember, these assignments are extra credit. Turn them in when you can. But also remember, a lot of you need to improve your grades. So, first things first. You will note that I do have a short 2-minute video tagged in here called Are We the Baddies Nazi Sketch. I promise it's not as disturbing as it sounds. So I like to include that one because it does in fact address a bit of the psychological question, which is how on earth could perfectly normal, pleasant people participate or control and conduct something like the Holocaust, the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews. And please note, that's just the Jews. I'm not even including all the other people they systematically murdered, such as, the handicapped, people that had emotional development issues, the gypsies, the homosexuals, and on and on and on. So, as you look at the digital answer sheet, you will notice I have a couple things here. The first of which is a preview activity with a poem. Now, this poem, notably, is written, please follow the mouse, guys, by Martin Niemöller. Now, he was a Lutheran minister and early Nazi supporter, as were most members of the church. Fun fact. However, like a number of the church, after the full extent of the Holocaust became obvious to people during the 1940s, he would oppose the regime. Famously, in 1946, after being released from a Nazi death camp, he would go on to do a number of speeches and would have a famous set of lines that were codified into this poem, which can be found at both the Los Angeles and the Washington, D.C. Holocaust memorials. So this is the first activity, is to read it, comment how it makes you feel. From there, we move on to the first of 2 readings. Now, there's a lot of reading this week. Excuse me. Because unfortunately I am not here to give you guys the full details, and the full and total scope would require hours and hours of video lecture on my part with a lot of aids. So instead, we're going to rely on some readings, and I highly recommend that you watch at least one of the Holocaust films. So for this first one, we're going to look at resistance during the Holocaust. That will be this one, tagged Readings, Resistance During the Holocaust, and it covers how people resisted the Holocaust at different levels. So it has the establishment of the Jewish ghettos. So for those of you who are wondering, ghetto is not an American word. Ghetto is in fact a Germanic word. It referred originally to the neighborhoods in which the Jews were isolated. The word has since spread and become a more common term in the English language. So in each of these, you'll see a description of what it is and a description of how the people fought and struggled against it. Then it moves on to the camps themselves. Now, most commonly in English, they're called concentration camps. However, a more accurate term is simply death camps, because that was the eventual intention, was to literally work or experiment on or simply execute people until you had wiped out the entire population, at which point you would then refill it and continue. So we have the resistance. It moves through the deportations. It's worth knowing that the concentration camps, the death camps, were largely located, not all, but largely, in Germany and Poland. And of course, there were some in other countries, but that's where the majority were. So, Jews are spread throughout Europe, as were the other, you can't see the air quotes I'm doing, enemies of the state, all of whom would be deported into the concentration camps for maximum efficiency. Because if the Nazis were one thing, they were definitely efficient. And lastly, we have this famous term, the final solution. The final solution refers to the later stages of the Holocaust where the Nazis began to actively exterminate in large, consistent numbers. And when I say large and consistent numbers, I mean potentially tens of thousands of people a day being executed. So that is the first of your readings today. And then after that, you have inside the death camps. So that will be this reading. This one is on a Google Doc. Now, you'll note this one's about a page per reading. And I highly recommend that you pace yourself with these because some of these are kind of disturbing. If you find that you're in the tell me more phase, I also highly recommend you guys do additional research on this stuff. So it'll discuss the process of arrival, what it was like to live there, and yes guys, these are all actual pictures. What it was like to work in places. So this one specifically is the work schedule at Auschwitz. So there were somewhere around, I believe, 60 to 70 concentration camps. I would have to look that up to verify that number. However, the justifiably most infamous one was Auschwitz-Birkenau. And Auschwitz-Birkenau was where a disproportionate number of people died, and the very famous sign that was put across it, Arbeit macht frei, which is work will set you free, which was, if nothing else, a sick joke by the Nazis, because technically it did set them free, because, you know, death is freedom from a certain perspective. And it will also discuss the experiments. So you guys will learn about a man named the Angel of Death. You'll see his name right here, Joseph Mengele. So you will get to learn all about what he liked to do with his prisoners. And finally, we have the extermination methods. Now, please note, these questions have been recopied over here. I would ask that you guys use red text to answer them to make it easier for me to read through, because otherwise it's just going to become a big block of text. After that, we have a responsibility. So you guys get to decide whose fault it is. So there's a PDF here that has the more explicit instructions, and normally you guys would be coloring this in and make a pie chart. Obviously, we can't do this. So instead, I included this so it gives you the breakdown of 10 different groups. Whose fault is it for the Holocaust? And you've got quite a variety here. You guys are going to look at each of these. So just do it as a box, assign the name, and assign the percentage of guilt. How much is it their fault? And I'm going to ask that you guys change the text color in order to make this easier to read. So the text box, guys, is this one over here. It's the letter A with a color bar under it. And you've got a whole gradient, or you can customize if, you know, the magenta just isn't quite the right shade of purple. So, you've got a number of groups. The actual residents of Auschwitz and other towns. And this doesn't mean the prisoners, this means the people actually living there. Because remember, they didn't build these in the middle of nowhere. There were cities and towns literally all around the camps. People would see the trains coming in, they could smell the smoke from the crematoriums where they burn the bodies. The minor soldiers, the ones who weren't actually in charge but were just following orders. Then we have Hitler himself, because, you know, Der Führer, the German citizens who voted for him, the Jews who did not try to escape. As you guys will learn in the resistance reading, there were plenty of Jews who fought back. The idea that Jews meekly accepted their fate is a common misconception and somewhat racist myth that occurs after the war. Then you have the top SS officers, so the Schutzstaffel, the ones who actually executed the final solution. And no, that isn't a pun, that's literally what they did. Then we have the non-Jewish Europeans who turned against their friends and fellow citizens. that will be related back to the poem from the preview activity. You have the leaders of the Allied countries who saw it happening but didn't get involved. And there were many of those, including America. So remember, every time somebody tells you how America saved the day in World War II, that was only after we spent 4 years ignoring the Holocaust. Then you have the churches. Again, it relates to that preview activity and the fact that the churches remain silent or in many cases actively supported the Nazis because after all, the Jews were the ancient enemy. And of course, last, we have God. How much is it God's fault, seeing as how he's supposed to be omnipotent and he allowed this to happen? Have fun with that one, guys. And lastly, I have 4 short answer paragraphs. This is an actual opportunity for you guys to really kind of do a short essay format and really just consolidate what the information you've learned and how you want to address it. So there's 4 questions here that run through and they are all connected to your assignments. And lastly, we have the Holocaust film list with a link to you for the Watch Mojo channel. And it has the top 10 Holocaust films. Now please note these instructions. Normally the Holocaust is one of the few lessons we do in this class with a film. The reason for this, the Holocaust is hard to teach in numbers and facts. I can tell you 6 million, but that's just a number, especially since it's been some 80 years at this point. Generally speaking, it's better done in images and dramatic retellings, by which I mean movies. So, usually, what you guys are doing is what I assign to those kids who do not get permission to watch the film Schindler's List. Because Schindler's List is R-rated, and I mean it's a hard R-rated. So, due to the circumstances, obviously I can't collect permission slips, I can't assign this, so instead, I'm going to encourage you, if you can and if you get parental permission, to watch at least one of the films. Now, there's a couple of these films that are not R-rated, that do not have excessive violence and language or nudity, and don't get excited. It's not the fun kind of nudity. It's the humans are just sacks of meat kind of nudity. It's the kind that makes you depressed in a whole new and interesting fashion. So, parent permission is going to be necessary for a lot of these guys. For others, if you can find it on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, or a number of these are even on YouTube as just full films, some of them you won't need permission, others try to get it. Again, if you can, Schindler's List is universally considered one of the greatest films of all time, like not just Holocaust, just all time. And it's the one I most recommend, but it's also the one that's the most upsetting and disturbing. So, do with that as you will. Okay, please remember, guys, I have office hours this week, not next week, but then when we come back on April 6th, that week again, I will have office hours from 9 to 10 that you can access via the announcement, which I will push up to the top each week because the link will remain the same. All right, guys, enjoy.